If you want to be a successful person in your work in the era in which we live, then you must always keep up with the great and very rapid progress in science and technology, the progress that has created a type of skills called hard skills. Skills that are not easy for most people to learn are skills certain in the field of medicine or engineering, or skills such as programming skill or data science, or in other words, skills that contain mathematics or science. The main problem is the idea of learning itself. Most people do not learn in the correct scientific way. People either have a state of fear that they will learn something new scientifically, or that they are in a state of despair after they begin the learning stage, and that is why in this episode we will talk about how you can learn difficult skills. How you can learn anything easily. Let us begin in the year 1955. The writer Barbara Oakley was born in the city of Lodi, California. She was a little girl who very much hated sciences, especially mathematics and physics, and she always had the idea that she would never love any scientific subject, and that she did not naturally have the ability to study any scientific field. This way of thinking led her to move away from the scientific fields and move towards the literary fields, and specifically she began to study the language in one of the institutes in California. The skill that having her study different languages helped her. She works in the U.S. Army, but during the period in which she was working in the Army, she began to meet some engineers. The thing I noticed in dealing with them was that they were very ordinary people like her. There was no difference in mental abilities, and this made her think seriously about studying the field of engineering, specifically electrical engineering, and she actually graduated. In the year 1096, I obtained a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Washington. In the year 1095, I graduated with a master's degree in electricity and computers from the University of Oakland, USA. In the year 1098, I became a professor of engineering at the same university. This is a very big transformation that the writer went through. The main reason was that she had learned learning skills. The skills that made her learn something were not expected, in fact, that she could learn it one day. The writer was not only able to excel in her field of study, but she was able to do one of the most important courses published on the internet, which is the Learning How to Learn course, or Learn How to Learn content. This course is the same content as the book you are watching now, and that is why I strongly advise you to watch this episode until the end so that you can learn how to learn. Before we talk about the learning process and the problems we go through, we must first talk about how the human brain works in the learning process. The writer says in the learning process, a person experiences two types of thinking. The first type is called the focus mode. The second type is called the diffusion mode or the focus mode. It is the mode that you use when you solve a specific problem. If, for example, you are solving a mathematical problem, or if you are doing programming, or if you are solving any scientific problem and you need to focus on it very much at that time, the focus mode is activated. In the human brain, what happens at that time is that brain activity increases very significantly, whether in the right side or the left side. But in the left side of the human brain, activity increases much more than in the right side, and at the same time, the front part of the human brain, which is located under the forelock in the brain, is activated. The part that is called all the major activity that occurs in the brain, its goal is that you can solve the difficult problem in front of you. Comfort, and at the same time, he is in a state of distraction and dispersion, or in other words, the person is not focused on anything in this situation, but he is thinking in an unconscious way about the ideas learned by this method of thinking, for which the right part of the person's brain is responsible, but at the same time and in contrast to the focus mode, the human brain is in a state of extreme rest. This method is very important because it helps you come up with creative ideas. Solutions that help you solve any problem by relaxing your brain and completely distancing yourself from the problem and trying to solve it in a different way. The author says that you must use both methods in order to be able to solve it. Any problem so that you can learn something new. The learning process depends on you focusing on the first thing in the focus mode, and then you make space for your brain. It uses the spread mode so that you can actually learn in the correct way. If, for example, you have an exam tomorrow and you are studying the subject for the first time in your life, if you are trying to study and focus very much on the thing you are doing, you use the focus mode for the period. What you remember most often, you will not benefit greatly from it because you do not have time to let the diffusion mode take its time. You will find that you feel very great nervous pressure because your brain is trying to focus on a specific idea and you do not have time to absorb these ideas, and therefore no matter your level of concentration while sitting. If you take it before the exam, this level will not help you do well in the exam because you do not comprehend the ideas sufficiently. The writer says that you must do a practical job. Balance and a process of continuous transition between the focus mode and the diffusion mode. To be able to do this, the writer advises that you do 3 important things. The first advice is physical activity. Physical activity helps stimulate the diffusion mode, and this is because it helps to secrete 2 very important substances that help you develop your thinking comes up with creative ideas. These 2 materials are neurons, or nerve cells, and neurobutos, or neural pathways, the pathways that help connect neurons to each other. As for the second piece of advice, it is the task routine, or routine tasks. The writer says that you can use household chores, the routine chores that you do on a daily basis, so that you can clear your mind. It is used in the spread mode, and thus you can give your brain enough rest to absorb important ideas. As for the third and final tip, it is rest and meditation, one of the most important things that helps a person if he is able to do the spread mode. This is the idea of rest, the idea that you relax your body by getting enough sleep. The writer says that sleep has a very essential role in a person being able to develop his mental abilities, and we talked about this idea in detail before in the book Why Do We Sleep? You will find its link in the video description. As for the idea of meditation, it includes different needs, such as you thinking, or you praying, or you practicing. Meditation, all these habits help you to enhance the diffusion mode and therefore you can learn better. After we talked about how the human brain works. It works in the learning process. In this part, we will talk about memory itself. How can a person memorize what he learns? The human brain has 2 types of memory. The first type is called working memory, while the second type is called long-term memory or long-term memory. If you imagine that the human brain is a worker like in the computer, you will find that the working memory works like the processor inside the computer. Its primary role is to process various information. If you are learning something new, the working memory is what works at the time when you are focusing on a specific thing, and the working memory cannot work with a large amount of information, and because thus, a person cannot do 7 or more things at the same time, but he cannot concentrate on them as necessary. He does some simple things so that he can focus on them and be able to learn them. On the other hand, long-term memory works like the part in a computer that records all the important things, the part that stores all the information. The space inside the long-term memory is much larger than the space in working memory, but the big difference is that there is some information that is present in long-term memory that needs more time to be able to be accessed by you, because you can store millions of pieces of information above a certain piece of information. When a person learns a specific piece of information, this information is called a chunk or chunk, and the process of assimilation is called chunking or chunking. When you learn something new, your working memory cannot absorb it a very small number of splits or cuts, and this is because the working memory cannot handle a very large amount of information. However, when a person begins to absorb the information, the human brain begins to perform the process of splitting or cutting, and it begins to store part of the information that it has learned in long-term memory. If you want to make sure that you have transferred the information from working memory to long-term memory, then you must make the information contain two needs. First, the information must be easy to remember. The second need is that the information is exposed to repetition. If you have specific information and want to learn it better, then you have a number of needs. You can do what you think is suitable for you in different ways so that you can increase the ease of remembering. The first thing is that you write the information itself is that if you are learning something specific, writing makes the information easier for you to remember it. The second thing is that you repeat the information through speech. If you are learning something new, try to say it out loud. The third point is that you use an example or use a simile to remember the information. The fourth point is body movement is that you are moving while you are learning a certain thing. The fifth point is that you use comedy to remember the information that you want to memorize. The sixth point is that you use the story. You use it to remember the information that you want to memorize. As for the seventh point, it is that you use different senses. You use more than one sense, such as the sense of smell and the sense of sight, so that you can provide the effect of the information on you, and therefore you can make it easy to remember. As for the final and last point, it is that you use time and space in order to be able to remember a certain piece of information. These different methods can help you in making the information easy to remember, but in order to be able to confirm the information, you must use the method of repetition, and there are two types of repetition possible. The first type you use is called intentional recall, while the second type is called spaced repetition. The idea of intentional recall is that after you remember something, you begin to review it at the moment. If, for example, you learn a new idea, try to close the book and start repeating the ideas. What you learned in your brain works the process of repetition immediately after learning in order to increase your ability to memorize the information. As for the process of spaced repetition, it is that you repeat the information more than once at different intervals. A person, after any study session, forgets the information he remembered, but if he started reviewing the things he remembered more than once, he would greatly appreciate that it is him. It increases the rate of memory retention. Therefore, if you are studying right before the exam, you will most likely forget everything you remember before the exam. The writer says that the idea of procrastination itself is not a bad idea, meaning that you can postpone unimportant things in order to do something important, but the problem is that we use procrastination in order to postpone important things versus if we do something else important. The main problem with procrastination is that procrastination itself has become a bad habit, meaning that you have become accustomed to procrastinating to the point that you are not able to break this bad habit. If we contemplate any habit that a person practices, we will find that it follows what is called the habit loop, and the habit loop is completed in 3 steps. The first step is called the cue, or the signal. As for the second step, it is called the routine, or practicing the habit itself. The third and final step is the reward for a person who practices the habit of procrastination. The signal is what is called the pain of expectation, the idea that he has a certain thing that he wants to study, but the problem is that he feels pain as soon as he expects. It is difficult for him to study something. He will do something that does not provide any comfort to his brain, and therefore the person begins to search about the thing that distracts him. This thing could be a message on WhatsApp, or that he is watching a video on YouTube, or that he is doing anything just because he wants to remove the feeling of pain that he is feeling, and therefore he begins to practice the routine of procrastination, and the reward that he gets is that he gets rid of it. From the pain of expectation, he gets rid of the feeling that he will do something difficult, and this is through the pleasure that he gets when he postpones a certain thing. The writer says that most people practice the habit of procrastination and believe that they will never get rid of the habit. And therefore she says that you must have the belief that you can actually change this habit, so that you do not prefer to postpone the thing you are learning. The writer says that in order to get rid of procrastination in 4 important things, you must do them. The first step is to plan your time. The writer says that just because you plan your time, just because you have a schedule and know exactly what to remember and what you need to finish, this helps you very much. You will be convinced inside yourself that you can resist the habit of procrastination, and if you want to know in detail how to plan your time, I strongly advise you to watch the episode of Make Time, the episode in which we talked in detail about the idea of organizing time. As for the second step, it is the basis of formulating negative thoughts. The problem or the pain of expectation is that you are afraid. One of the pain that you will feel when you begin the learning stage, and that is why the writer says that you must reformulate your thoughts, is that you begin to think about needs, the negativity that will happen to you if you do not study. On the other hand, think about the positive thing that you will gain from the study session. The third step that helps you overcome the problem of procrastination is to get rid of distractions. A person who is exposed to a lot of distractions has a much greater chance of practicing the habit of procrastination, and because thus, the writer advises that you get rid of anything that might distract you. This could be the people around you. It could be the emails. It could be messages on WhatsApp. It could be meetings at work or the notifications that you receive from social media. As for the fourth and final step, it is or focus on the process. The writer says that most people focus on the product. The final goal that you want to achieve is that you study this subject or that you pass a certain exam. You always think about the final goal, and this always makes you procrastinate. For this reason, the writer advises that you put all your focus on the learning process itself. One of the most famous and very practical methods is the Pomodoro technique or the tomato technique. The idea is that you will work for a period and rest for a certain period. For example, you may study for 25 minutes, then rest for 5 minutes, and 25 minutes for another 5 minutes, and you will continue this process until you have completed 4 sessions of Pomodoro. And after completing these 4 sessions, you can take a little more rest and repeating the situation again. The writer says that if you think using the Pomodoro method, your thinking technique itself will depend on time, not on the final product. Therefore, you can get rid of procrastination to a very large extent. If you want to learn something new, you must understand 3 important ideas. You must understand how we think, understand how we can strengthen memory, and know how to solve the problem of procrastination. Thinking is of 2 types. The first type is called the concentration mode, and the second type is called the diffusion mode. Concentration mode is the mode in which a person tries to focus on a specific thing and learns something difficult, such as, for example, learning a specific mathematical operation, learning a programming code, or learning any scientific principle for the first time. On the other hand, the diffusion mode is the mode in which the person is not thinking about anything. Certainly, a person is freed by his imagination, and a person is freed by his thoughts. Whoever learns only by focusing is exposed to what is called a psychological phenomenon that does not allow him to see only one solution to the problem. Therefore, when a person learns anything new, he needs to alternate between focusing and spreading. A person can apply these ideas in a practical way by doing 3 things. Needs by doing physical activity and doing routine tasks, and by rest and meditation. As for memory, a person has 2 types of memory. The first type is called working memory, and the second type is called long-term memory or long-term memory. Working memory is what processes the information that you are learning at the same moment, and this type of memory has a very small area. On the other hand, long-term memory is the memory that you can use at any time in the future, and this type of memory has a very large area that you can store in it. Millions of pieces of information. In the process of assimilating a person needs to do what is called shanking or slicing. The information that is present in the working memory is called shrunk or chunking, and the process of shrunking or slicing makes this piece turn into a much smaller piece, the piece that is stored in long-term memory. If you want, it strengthens memory. You need to make the information stand out in two ways. It must be easy to remember, and it must be exposed to repetition. In order for the information to be easy to remember, you must write it, or repeat it verbally, or link it by using an example or simile, or move your body, or you use comedy, you use the story, or you use more than one sense at the same time. Finally, you link this information to time and place at the same time. In order to repeat the information, you need to use the intentional recall method and use the spaced repetition method. After a person tries to understand the information and memorize it, he needs to overcome another problem, a problem that hinders the learning process, which is the problem of procrastination, and in order to be able to do this, it is necessary he does 4 important things. He must plan his time. He must reformulate negative thoughts. He gets rid of distractions. Finally, he focuses on the educational process instead of focusing on the final product. I hope you benefited and enjoyed this episode. Of course, if you liked the episode, don't forget to like and share this video. It helps, guys. To spread this content to the largest number of people, even if you are new to the channel, do not forget to subscribe and turn on the bell to receive the next episodes as soon as they are uploaded. Of course, if you have reached this stage, give me a solid check mark.